2006 Everest climbing season became the most controversial ever. The ethics of commercial mountaineering hit headlines around the world. Climbers were accused of putting their own ambitions above the lives of fellow mountaineers. A record 500 climbers summited Everest. Some died trying.
For anyone to climb Mount Everest requires a superhuman effort. 90% of the people who set off to climb Everest never discover how hard it is because they turn back before then. Even when you're using oxygen, it feels like you're on a treadmill and breathing through a straw. No matter how hard you try, you just can't get enough.
In 30 years of mountaineering, Lincoln Hall has summited many of the world's great peaks, but not Everest.
Well, people are certainly drawn to Everest because it's the ultimate symbol of adventure. I mean, there's other mountains that are harder, more beautiful perhaps, but of course nothing else is higher. It just leaves everything for dead.
So in 2006, when Lincoln receives an invitation to join an expedition to the north side of Everest, he doesn't hesitate. But it's a risky proposition. At 29,000 feet, the summit of Everest has 30% of the oxygen that exists at sea level. Ascending too quickly can lead to acute mountain sickness and eventually death. Recent studies suggest that climbers over 50 are at least twice as likely to die at this height. Lincoln Hall has just turned 50. Putting his writing career on hold, he'll be leaving his wife Barbara and 2 teenage sons behind.
It is hard to explain why you would face such dangers, but I knew how dangerous it was, and I felt that the dangers were within my grasp.
Lincoln begins his journey from base camp, 18,000 feet above sea level. From here, he'll move up the glacier to advanced base camp, then up the ice slopes to Camp 1. Then he'll climb through the high camps and hopefully onto the summit. Lincoln has now spent 2 months on the mountain, acclimatizing to the low oxygen levels. This footage shows members of Lincoln's expedition. It has cost each climber $15,000 to join the 20-strong international team run by Russian Everest veteran Alex Abramov.
Today it's a very long way, about 4 hours. From here it seems very close, but really not less than 4 hours. So people should be brave today, and I hope everybody reaches this altitude. Weather is perfect.
Climbers on Everest must also battle the weather. There's usually only a 2-week window every year that allows access to the summit. However, this year the weather is unseasonably good, keeping the window open for much longer. More climbers make summit attempts, but the casualty rate has also been higher. Already this season, there have been 9 deaths. Just before Lincoln leaves Camp 1, news arrives of a 10th. It is Russian teammate Igor Plyushkin.
One of the Russian climbers from our team had got into some sort of difficulty. He was actually a very experienced climber, but he was having problems, and suddenly I learnt that he was dead.
Igor's death is a wake-up call for Lincoln. Igor was a similar age and also an experienced mountaineer.
That was a shock. There'd already been a number of deaths on the mountain, so already this was an expedition that I'd never experienced because there was just so much death this time round.
It is now late in the season, and very few climbers are left on the mountain. Most of Lincoln's team have already made their summit attempts, or have turned back. The only members remaining are Lincoln and German climber Thomas Weather with his guide. Climbing at their own pace, they will continue up the mountain for 3 more days, to camps 2, 3, then the summit.
Not long after Sherpas and I left the halfway camp to head to the high camp, we came to a big flat rock. It was an obvious place to rest. There was just this sort of long pile of rocks in front of us, and you could see that there was a body under there.
It is the grave of Igor Plyushkin, the Russian climber who died 2 days earlier.
Igor's death had been in my mind, of course, since it happened. and to come across his body was just a shock.
Everest has become the final resting place for around 200 climbers. Lincoln's 3 Sherpa companions, Dorje, Dawa and Lakcha, are accustomed to encountering their frozen remains.
The Sherpas don't like to move the bodies. I guess there's a part of superstition in there, but there's also a Buddhist belief that when someone dies, consciousness leaves the body over a 3-day period. So a body should be left in the one place for 3 days. And of course, nobody's going to hang around up there for 3 days, or they'll just add to the body list.
Too difficult and dangerous to retrieve, most of Everest's victims remain where they fall. 22 years ago, Lincoln came close to being a victim himself. This footage, shot in 1984, records an attempt to summit Everest by an unclimbed route up the north face of the mountain. Organized by Lincoln Hall, it was a climb that would go down in mountaineering history.
The route that we chose on the north face turned out to be very dangerous. There were a lot of avalanches.
The attempt was brave, but perilous. To find a new route without fixed ropes, Sherpa support, or oxygen.
And in the end, we were really stretched.
Lincoln's climbing partner was Greg Mortimer.
Oh yeah, it was an extraordinary, formative experience for everyone involved. We're a very close group of friends. On our appointed summit day, Lincoln wasn't feeling right, and his feet and hands, particularly his feet, were really cold, and he was worried that if he went on, he was going to get frostbitten, considerably. So he just made that, gut-wrenching decision to turn around.
They're at the summit. They're on the top.
Greg Mortimer achieved his ambition by summiting that day,
They're waving at us.
but Lincoln Hall missed his chance.
Really, it was a survival decision for me. It was probably the hardest decision I've had to make, but it was the right one.
But it's a decision Lincoln has had 22 years to think about. What makes Everest so dangerous is not its technical difficulty, but the extreme altitude. No amount of climbing experience can prepare the body for its unpredictable effects. Above 27,000 feet, human life is most at risk, which is why it is called the death zone. Still reeling from his encounter with Igor's body, Lincoln is forced to consider whether to continue.
I thought, well, this here now is the purity of mountaineering. Do I want to go on? And I actually wrote a list about why I should and why I shouldn't. I rang Barbara.
Hi everyone, it's me. I guess you're out. Happy birthday, Dylan.
I guess we'd been talking about it on and off for years. He's always carried that disappointment of not achieving his dream the first time around. So it was an opportunity to see whether he was able to do it. And there was just a message on the answering machine just reassuring us that it was optimum conditions. The weather was perfect. He was climbing strongly, climbing with oxygen, climbing with 3 Sherpas. So everything was great.
I'm feeling strong. The weather's fantastic. And we'll be leaving at midnight. I love you all. Bye for now.
It's midnight, and Lincoln Hall is at the point of no return. After 22 years, his chance to summit Everest has arrived again. After 4 days of solid climbing, he heads into the death zone, where survival depends upon speed. Only 3,000 feet below the summit, Lincoln will try to ascend and return as quickly as possible. A grueling 18-hour day.
One of the unpleasant aspects of mountaineering is the procedure of getting up in the middle of the night so that you have the whole of daylight to use for your climb. You've got this big mask in front of your face, which means you can't really see your feet very well, and you've got a headlamp on, so you've got a very narrow beam of light.
But suddenly, Lincoln comes face to face with yet another victim of Everest's brutal conditions. It is the body of British climber David Sharp.
It was quite shocking. His body was literally frozen solid.
Of the 11 deaths during this climbing season, the most famous is David Sharp. 10 days earlier, Sharp had crawled into a shallow cave. It was his third attempt to climb Everest, but his method was extremely risky.
He had a minimalist approach to climbing. He had no Sherpa support. He had no real contact with other expedition members because he didn't have a radio. When he was discovered dying, nobody even knew who he was. He was very much alone.
As many as 40 climbers walked past David Sharp as he lay dying. Concealed in the darkness, most didn't see him. Those who did see him assumed that he was resting or already dead. But David Sharp didn't die that night. Next morning, he was still alive. Now visible in the daylight, the returning climbers began to notice him.
It was a very tragic situation. Climbers coming back from the summit, the coldest night of the season, 11 cases of serious frostbite that night alone. It was the worst night of the season to be out in the elements, and that's when David Sharp was dying.
The media reacted swiftly to the news that David Sharp was left to die.
David Sharp, he ran into trouble on the mountain, and he is passed by a number of climbers.
40 other climbers passed by mountaineer David Sharp as he lay dying.
Has commercial mountaineering made climbing a remarkably heartless pursuit?
Criticism all the more stinging since it comes from Sir Edmund Hillary.
He was a human being, and we would regard it as our duty to get him back to safety.
The headlines reignited the debate about the ethics of mountaineering and whether or not they're being corrupted by modern commercial and personal imperatives.
David Sharp's situation was portrayed as climbers concerned only with their own ambition.
Synthesising these things in the comfort of your own lounge room can't let you understand what's taking place above 8,000 metres. It's such a fine line between getting it right and getting killed.
The reason David Sharp could not be rescued was because it was physically impossible to do so. He could not walk, and the reality of being at extreme altitude is that everything effectively weighs 4 times as much, because you don't have the oxygen in your system to make your muscles work. So to be able to lift a dead body or a nearly dead body is just impossible. There was just no chance of bringing him down at all, no chance.
Lincoln and his Sherpas are making good progress. They reach the notorious second step. Shown here, it's a 150-foot vertical rock wall, the biggest obstacle on the climb. After 9 hours climbing, Lincoln and his 3 Sherpas approach the summit.
I could see the summit ahead. There were some prayer flags dangling over the very steep lip of the east face, and that was an indicator that was the summit. It was obvious that we were going to make it. The last little steep section to the summit, which is just how it should be, I guess. And the one last step, and I was on the top. there was no one else there. It was just an incredible privilege, I guess, to have it just to myself, the highest person on the planet. It was quite an unworldly feeling. It's not one of those, you know, punch the air type jubilation events. The tops of mountains aren't like that. You've got the whole rest of the mountain. It's only half time. You've got no locker room to go into, you know.
Back at base camp, Lincoln's old friend and 1984 expedition member Mike Dillon is the first to hear the news in the communications tent.
That day that Lincoln got to the summit really started well for us because I just happened to be near the radio room and I heard his voice.
This is Lincoln. We're on the summit. We're on the summit.
Monitoring progress 8,000 feet below is expedition leader Alex Abramov. These are the actual radio transmissions.
Now begin, go down, go down. Don't forget that you need go down. Descent is also important, over.
We know that, Chris. We know that, and thank you for making it possible for us, or for me. Thanks, Alex. Bye.
And he was totally lucid, he was calm, and it was 9 o'clock in the morning, and everything was fantastic.
His wife Barbara receives the good news.
The phone call came to say that Lincoln had summited and, you know, wasn't it fantastic? But I did have this inner reservation because I hadn't wanted to hear about the summit. I just wanted to hear when I knew he was down and safe.
Lincoln now has the most dangerous part of the climb ahead of him, the descent.
We had a good rest on the summit. We're there for 20 minutes, and that was really long enough because I feel very uncomfortable on a, you know, it might be a magnificent place, but on a high summit I feel uncomfortable. I know that it's a very dangerous place to be. I know how quickly time can pass, how you can be mesmerised by the view. So we headed down, the 3 Sherpas and I.
150 feet below, another member of Lincoln's expedition, Thomas Webber, is forced to turn around.
Very close to the summit, Thomas had to turn back because he was starting to lose his balance and sort of veer off. Some of his mental functions were beginning to not work properly, and at that point the guide decided that they should head on down.
After the adrenaline surge of summiting, climbers on descent face a bigger battle. Total exhaustion and the threat of running out of oxygen.
The descent of any big mountain is always the most exhausting part of the climb. And so I wasn't surprised when I started to feel incredibly exhausted. And there's this big snow slope which was like really easy descent. And I suppose that was a bit of a danger for me, perhaps, in the fact that I really didn't have to think about it, and that maybe allowed me to let my mental guard down.
Lincoln doesn't know it, but he begins to suffer from high-altitude cerebral edema. Low pressure is forcing fluid to leak inside his brain, causing it to swell. Symptoms are lethargy, hallucinations, and irrational behavior. Lincoln must descend immediately, or he will die.
And I just developed this incredible lethargy, and I didn't see it as anything other than lethargy. I wasn't unconscious, but I just lost it.
News of Lincoln's condition is yet to reach base camp, as the expedition leader is preoccupied with another unfolding tragedy. An urgent radio call is received from climbers 150 feet below Lincoln. It is Thomas Webber's guide.
Tom's dead. Oh, for f***'s sake.
So now you're sure he is dead? Oh.
Oh, my God.
He's halfway down the slope. It's a very dangerous place. He's staying down in the snow for more than 5 minutes. He's not breathing. Oops. Hey, if you are sure he's dead, blow down.
What apparently had happened was that Thomas had simply said to the guide, "I'm dying," and he died, just like that. Strange. He's had some premonition. It's just one of these strange things that happen on Everest.
Jeez, what a tragedy.
But the worst news was, out of the blue, the expedition leader who was monitoring the activities high on the mountain suddenly told Thomas's Sherpa to go up again to help Lincoln, and he was in trouble, that Lincoln was in trouble. First time we knew about it.
Harry, I don't know how you feel yourself, but now Lincoln is very bad, and if it's possible, send one Sherpa up to help Lincoln, because Lincoln is near the dead also, and take one Sherpa oxygen and go down.
And this is a double terrible shock to us, because he was, as I said, there's no reason why anything should have gone wrong with Lincoln.
Thomas's Sherpa, Pemba, begins to climb back up the mountain to where Lincoln is fighting for his life.
I was struggling, but the Sherpas were struggling more because they knew that if they didn't get me down, I would die. That's what happens with cerebral edema. And I was being so uncooperative. It would have been the worst day of their lives.
Back at Advanced Base Camp, Lincoln's friend and fellow climber, Kevin Orgello, is manning the radio. Kevin came to Everest as part of a film crew, but was unable to acclimatize. He remained at Advanced Base Camp to support the team. His video diary records what happens next.
With information from the Sherpas, Lincoln is, I suppose, best described as crazy, as altitude crazy. I've just heard that the Sherpas are trying to literally kick him to move, but he's just gone mad.
It was a rough day for Kevin, because not only was he on the radio and suddenly hearing the news that Thomas had died, but a few hours later he heard that I was dying as well.
Lincoln!
I just hope Lincoln takes a big breath of oxygen and gets moving, because he's a good man.
The Sherpas have no choice but to try and manhandle Lincoln down to safety. In the communications tent, Lincoln's teammate Richard Harris tries to make him focus.
Lincoln, this is Richard. Barbara's waiting for you. Dylan and Dorsey are waiting for you. You need to come down now.
Pemba, Thomas Webber's Sherpa, arrives to help with Lincoln's rescue.
I'd have some moments of lucidity.
Yes. What are you doing here?
He said,
Thomas
has died. And that was just this huge shock. Just seemed so inconceivable, since he seemed to have been going so well. And that's then I shut down again.
Cerebral edema is toying with Lincoln's mind.
I thought I was in Queensland. A really severe case of wishful thinking. You know, I actually felt quite safe and quite happy just to be there. And then I heard an Australian voice speaking English.
Lincoln, I think that your mind is playing tricks with you and you are trying to fight the Sherpas. They're trying to help you down. Please help them. Help yourself for your family's sake and our sakes.
What I was actually hearing was Michael Dillon's voice on the radio.
It's so frustrating being down there because you're so far away from everything. You can't rush up and try and help rescue Lincoln. It's all you can do is try and rescue him with your voice.
The urging became so persistent. Suddenly I realised that in fact I was way up on this huge mountain and this was an exceptionally dangerous situation. I suddenly took the instruction to continue abseiling.
In his delusional state, Lincoln has to abseil down the treacherous second step. All the Sherpas can do is watch helplessly. In Australia, Lincoln Hall's wife, Barbara, waits anxiously for news from Everest.
And of course I had been thinking the whole time on my way home from work, calculating the hours and thinking when I got home at about 6 p.m. that there should have been a message by then, but there wasn't.
Then comes the worrying news that Lincoln is still near the summit.
I immediately felt really sick and full of dread because he would have been up near the summit for probably 6 or 7 hours, and I couldn't imagine what difficulty he was having.
At 28,000 feet, Lincoln's difficulty is the second step. This footage shows the 150-foot vertical rock face. In his disoriented state, it's proving extremely dangerous.
My mind was saying abseil, but my body couldn't handle it. I whizzed down the ropes, pretty well out of control. What happened was I swung across and slammed into Pemba to try and stop me hurting him so much. I sort of thought, well, I'll use the spring of my leg to slow down the impact, but unfortunately I had these spiky things called crampons on the end of my boots, which are really sharp. I mean, they're designed so your feet don't slip on ice. Well, they certainly didn't slip on Pemba's thigh either. At the time, I hadn't realised I'd hit him with the crampons and that I'd actually wounded his leg quite badly. And we're like two spiders with hanging beneath this cliff on our abseil ropes.
Pemba is badly hurt, but he and the other 3 Sherpas simply refuse to give up on Lincoln.
People say that the Sherpas should have left me when I was being really difficult, but the Sherpas just don't think like that. What they were engaged in doing was getting me down the mountain, and that's what they were going to do.
After getting Lincoln down the second step, they managed to put him on the radio. This is his transmission.
I'm doing the lethargy for about 4 people. Where are we? We're still at the second step. So, it's bloody tough up there.
Lincoln, do you copy?
Did you say do I cough? Or do I copy? Over.
Lincoln, us and your family down here, and keep on going. You've got 4 Sherpas there who respect you a lot.
But yeah, look, I don't know what time it is, but I'll talk to you when I can. Okay, thanks. Bye.
The Sherpas really struggled to get me as far as they could, but eventually they had to stop.
In an extraordinary feat of endurance, the Sherpas have dragged Lincoln as far as they can. But at 28,000 feet, they are still in the death zone. Running out of oxygen here means almost certain death.
When Lakcha, Dorji, Dawa and Pemba finally got me to the point where I spent the night, they could do nothing else. We had a 19-hour day there, and it wasn't 19 hours of descent. I mean, it was 19 hours of struggle. And so it was an extraordinarily hard thing for them physically. We'd all run out of oxygen, dehydrated. We were all close to death.
But that's not all. Lincoln faces yet another threat, the bitter cold. Frostbite is a result of the body's attempt to preserve its core temperature. Blood vessels near the skin begin to constrict, forcing blood to the essential organs. Without warmth, the cells in the extremities begin to freeze. Down at Advanced Base Camp, Kevin Orgello is realizing that time is running out.
A decision at some point has got to be made to leave him to die.
Yeah, but could you, your best friend? No way.
Yeah, but the decision has got to be made by the Sherpas and Alex. They can't. They're on a knife-edge ridge that only one person can walk by. You can't. If he doesn't want to move because he's just become completely delirious, what can I do? And at what point do you decide that? Because otherwise you're going to have one dead climber plus 3 dead Sherpas.
Yeah.
It is at this point that Lincoln slips into a coma due to cerebral edema. His brain is shutting down, and his respiration becomes barely perceptible.
From what I understand, they were monitoring my, vital signs. My breathing was getting less and less frequent and more shallow. They couldn't find a pulse. One of them poked me in the eye, to which I didn't respond at all.
At 5:20 p.m., the Sherpas declare him dead.
The decision has had to be made to save the Sherpas' lives, and that's to leave Lincoln. Sherpas have been working at over 8,000 metres now for over 24 hours, and although the Sherpa people are very strong and very tough and very kind and loyal, there's only so much they can do before their own lives have been put at risk.
The Sherpas stay with Lincoln for another 2 hours, until finally expedition leader Alex Abramov orders them down. They take Lincoln's belongings, and he's left alone with no oxygen, water, or shelter. Nobody has ever been left for dead this high and survived.
I was meditating by the fire, and somehow I felt Lincoln's arms around me, and I didn't like the feeling of that at all.
My next step, of course, was to have to phone Barbara, his wife, and we just knew what a tragedy. We were just a small part of his life, but to have to suddenly make the phone call to say that, he died to his family, that was terrible.
Another phone call came through from base camp, and I just knew instantly that it was the worst news possible, and I didn't want to hear it, and I didn't want to continue the conversation, but I had to be told.
Mum called us out there, and it had been Mike who'd called, and she sat us down on the couch and said, boys. About 20 minutes ago, your dad passed away.
Well, everything just seemed to go blank.
And we just sat there together in a huddle, holding hands and hugging and crying, and we didn't know what to do.
Alone, the highest person on Earth, Lincoln Hall, has been declared dead. News of the tragedy quickly spreads around the world.
For those involved, I think it's kind of like one of those things, like, you know, where were you when John F. Kennedy was shot type things. That depth of shock and horror and warm emotion and you know, that crazy mix of things that goes with the death of a very dear friend. And it was hard.
We left discussing plans to build a memorial to him at base camp. I remember I looked back up at the mountain and I'd never seen it look more beautiful. It like it had a translucent quality. And of course Lincoln was up there and Lincoln was dead.
But something unexpected happens that night. The weather begins to change. A blanket of cloud covers Lincoln, preventing the temperature from dropping below -25 degrees.
I mean, it's very hard to know exactly what happened. I resurfaced somehow and I actually woke up and I realized where I was.
Lincoln's luck begins to turn.
Whatever way you look at it, it was a very strange set of circumstances. I'd been left for dead, and yet, at one level, my mind was connecting. There was all this stuff still happening in my head, and it's all very vivid.
Determined not to die, Lincoln's subconscious begins to fight back. He starts to hallucinate.
It was a case of me rejecting death and insisting on life. And the way that was expressed to me was I was wearing a grey cloak, and that cloak was like a cloak, the cloak of death that was welcoming me, and I was wearing it. And I knew I had to accept the cold and whatever else was going to happen if I put that cloak away. And then I felt like a pilgrim, I suppose, someone who knows where they've got to go, doesn't know what the journey's going to be, but knows that's his only choice in life. I'm not arrogant enough to think that I'm so special that I can just decide I'm not going to die and not die. I had to believe that I wasn't going to die, because otherwise I would not have been able to face that impossible set of circumstances. The hypothermia, the hypoxia, the exhaustion, the dehydration, the cerebral edema. It was a death sentence, and I had to utilise everything that I'd learnt over 3 decades of mountaineering.
Drawing on years of Buddhist meditation and yogic breathing techniques, Lincoln is able to remain conscious in spite of hypothermia.
Soon the sun came and there was this amazing, life-giving warmth.
After 30 hours in the death zone at -25 degrees, Lincoln Hall should really be dead. Hallucinating wildly, he is in the final dangerous stages of hypothermia and is still a long way from safety. But his lucky streak continues.
There was so much good fortune. The most dramatic was the appearance of a team of 4 climbers who were heading for the summit.
Unlike David Sharp, who died 10 days earlier, Lincoln is fully conscious, moving around and clearly visible to the approaching mountaineers. Climbing that morning is a team led by American guide Dan Mazur with Jangbu Sherpa, Andrew Brash, and Miles Osborne.
I was kind of staring down at my feet, as you do, because, you know, you're just so focused on one foot in front of the other. And I kind of looked up, and then I saw this kind of yellow kind of blob sitting up there on the ridge, and I was just completely dumbstruck. I didn't know what to think.
Hey, so what are you doing here?
We went up to him, and the first thing that he said was, "I bet you're surprised to see me here." And that was the thing that completely threw me.
When Miles and his party found me that morning, they were stunned to see that I had unzipped my down suit and was half undressed. There are two possible reasons. One is that I was rejecting the cloak of death, and the other is that I was in the final stages of hypothermia, about to die.
Up to 50% of hypothermia victims are found with their clothes off. It's called paradoxical undressing. When death is imminent, blood returns to the extremities in a rush, producing the sensation of a hot flush.
I don't think it even crossed anybody's mind until that point as to, well, would we go to the summit or not?
Who are you?
I'm Lincoln Hall.
We found a climber. He's saying his name's Lincoln Hall.
I was behaving erratically, not that I was aware of it. The first thing they did was to secure me to a rope.
I want to get off the boat.
At the time, he seemed to think that he was on a boat, and the one thing that he was desperately trying to do, frozen fingers and all, was to try and pull himself off the ridge there, to try and kind of disembark from the boat, which obviously wasn't the best of ideas at the time because it was about a 10,000-foot drop.
We're on the boat. We're on the boat. We're on the boat.
Down at Advanced Base Camp, Kevin has had a bad night.
Yesterday was a horrible day. We lost two very good friends. Thomas in the morning, and then a hell of a day with Lincoln. Last night I went to bed, and I'll be honest, I shed some tears in my tent for them. I just couldn't believe that we lost two friends on the mountain. Today I woke up, and as you can see, it's a beautiful day on Everest. Went up to Alex and heard the news that Lincoln is still alive. So Alex instantly launched a rescue, and currently these amazing guys from Nepal are climbing up there to hopefully bring our friend down.
Miles and his colleagues stay with Lincoln for 4 hours.
Just before we saw Lincoln, I firmly believed at that moment that there was nothing that could stop us from reaching the summit.
The time spent with him has meant their precious oxygen supply has depleted, and it's now too late in the day to continue. After years of saving to raise the $25,000 he needed for the expedition, it is all over for Miles.
I knew then that in my lifetime I was never ever going to get to the summit. I took one last look, took a picture, and then got down as fast as possible. I was so pissed off, I can't even tell you.
I know what it's like to turn back from the summit. I know that sort of huge burning sense of disappointment. And I do know that Miles felt that as well.
It took me 24 hours to get the perspective that in the big picture, everything had worked out fine. Missing the summit didn't bother me that much. Lincoln was okay. And I got so many emails from friends at home who had said, I don't know what I would have done if I'd read that you'd left this guy and gone onto the summit.
Base camp, do you receive, over?
Due to a radio blackout, Kevin is unable to transmit the good news.
Base camp, from ABC, over. His family believe he's dead, and yet the man is almost having a fist fight with the Sherpas that are trying to bring him down. It's almost comical if it wasn't so sad. Base camp, do you receive, over? Of course, we all know this up here, but his friends down at base camp are going through hell believing their friend is dead. And I can't tell them. Base camp, do you receive, over?
It is several hours before Kevin eventually gets through to base camp, and from there, the good news spreads around the world.
People in our office in Sydney saying they'd heard somewhere via the internet that they thought Lincoln might be alive. And my immediate response to that was, no, don't go there. Don't clutch onto that, given we'd just been through the trough of death. And then, until we found out for sure what was going on.
Well, I was just generally surfing the net. Someone emailed me a bunch of news links saying stuff about my dad.
And it had on the front page, Everest climber found alive. And it had a picture of Dad there.
It was stated as fact that he was alive. And so we breathed heavily for a while and thought we couldn't believe it.
After 36 hours of fighting for his life, Lincoln Hall makes his momentous arrival at Advanced Base Camp. He's exhausted and emotionally drained. Kevin Orgello is there to capture the moment.
Where are the bloody filmmakers, eh, when you need them? I mean, I'm alive now. I got some more frostbite to add to my collection. It's good, really, because my kids have never seen fresh frostbite. So... We hope you're so proud to have the flag there.
I almost left my children without a father and my wife without a husband. And had that happened, I could not even begin to think about forgiving myself. Which was why I just had to come back.
Yeah, hi there.
I only got the opportunity to talk to Barbara once I was down an advanced base camp.
So apparently I'm getting on yak soon.
Lincoln's voice was so unrecognisable, faint, croaky, crackly, that I wasn't sure it was him.
Tell her you're well, come on. Yes, I'm well. You're always saying I'm well, Lee, that's what I need to tell you. They've been forcing food into me, little bastards.
She couldn't believe it was me, and what I did was I said, well, of course it's me. I hope you haven't started looking for another husband.
I thought, well, that really is, that's him.
What do you reckon? Doesn't look the greatest, but he is.
It was so exciting. It was bloody exciting. Because we felt just so wretched, you know. And so it was all that much more sweet.
This footage shows Lincoln finally reaching base camp. After 2 months on Everest, the expedition is over. 22 years on, Lincoln Hall has achieved his dream. But his greatest achievement was not reaching the summit, but getting down alive. His first priority is to find the Sherpas who helped save his life.
I just wanted to thank them so much for what they had done, because they really had risked their lives for me. If Pemba or any of the other Sherpas had died and I survived, would be the most dreadful outcome possible. It would just be the worst thing I can think of. Pemba was the only Sherpa that I was able to see as soon as I got down. He just kept telling me, don't worry, you're alive, don't worry, it's okay. And I think they were just so happy that what they had done had saved my life.
With the trophy of climbing Everest so highly prized, the 2006 season of death is unlikely to be the last. Lincoln Hall's return from the dead on Everest is a miracle. He should have frozen to death, but he didn't. He should have died from cerebral edema, but he didn't. His survival still eludes explanation by medical science, and it's something he is still coming to terms with.
One thing that's helped me to deal with that is the Tibetan Buddhist interpretation of the nature of death, which is that consciousness leaves the body, you know, in different stages, and there's 8 of those stages. And it's basically a shutting down, a bit like you do when you get out of your helicopter. You turn this off and you turn that off, and the whirring starts to go quieter and quieter. Well, I went through the 2 of those levels. I can tick 2 of those boxes in terms of consciousness leaving me. Now, the big question is, what caused the reverse? I just don't know.